of the medical-industrial complex because it is a good introduction into the reality of what has been going on in our germ theory of medicine. Like the moon landing, it doesn't take much time and research to understand that AIDS is one giant fraud of epic proportions. There is so much information, expert testimony, and documentaries available that I'm amazed the lie persists, just like the moon landing. More and more prominent doctors, scientists, and researchers are speaking out, and they pay a heavy price, as I'm sure you can imagine. But like the moon landing, in my opinion, it takes faith to believe in AIDS, because logic and reason will lead you to the fact that there is not one single proof that supports the HIV house of cards. Now, I would like to present a few clips from 3 of such individuals. First, you'll see Dr. Robert Wilner, a very knowledgeable and well-spoken critic of the HIV virus theory of AIDS. Then Nobel Prize-winning microbiologist Kary Mullis, who, by the way, invented the PCR reaction test that is used to detect HIV. You know there's a problem when the guy who invented one of the tests calls the virus theory bogus. As you watch, you'll learn exactly what these tests show. Lastly, you will see chemist and biologist Dr. David Raznick, interviewed by Dr. Len Saputo, and Dr. Raznick calls AIDS a criminal hoax, and I completely agree with that statement. The lives that have been destroyed by the AIDS misdiagnosis and the deadly treatment, usually with AZT, a chemotherapy drug from the 1960s that was shelved because it was too toxic. This to me screams of genocide. And the money that has been stolen, upwards of $250 billion through our government alone, is staggering. In 2017, the U.S. federal government will spend $34 billion to fight an imaginary monster called HIV. That's almost double NASA's budget, folks. So hopefully this video will introduce you to the AIDS fraud, which I believe is the moon landing of the medical-industrial complex, because it is so obvious. Whether you take it any further is up to you, but the AIDS fraud is a good start. Be aware that it can also be used as gatekeeping so that you don't go any further into the failure of germ theory, sort of like those who acknowledge the moon landing hoax, yet they still believe in NASA and space claims. And that being said, even if you just look into AIDS, at least it is something, and it is extremely important because not only is the AIDS fraud claiming countless lives and destroying families, it is also robbing us blind.
When it was first announced that Dr. Robert Gallo had found the virus that probably caused AIDS, and that announcement was made with Margaret Heckler in 1984 to the press and to the media, without one single scientific document appearing in any journal in the United States.
The probable cause of AIDS has been found.
And she introduced the scientist who led the team, Dr. Robert Gallo. When Gallo's group examined the blood of people...
And as we know now, without any proof whatsoever that the virus caused any disease. The media picked up on it for the sake of a story. And soon the virus that probably caused AIDS was now the virus that caused AIDS. It was proven in the press and nowhere else. Now, I have offered for over a year now, and I continue to offer it, $100,000 to anyone who will give me one scientific document that proves that HIV causes any serious disease. It doesn't. It is a scandal and a scam beyond belief. The virologists who are responsible for this, what do they have to gain? Now, I don't know what Duesberg had to gain, or Charles A. Thomas, or Kary Mullis. He already got his Nobel Prize. Why does he come out and say it? And he's the one that found the test, the PCR reaction. And he said that there is no body of evidence that supports that the virus causes any disease whatsoever. But what about the individuals who have perpetrated this lie? They are all multi-millionaires. What do we have to say about the National Institutes of Health when a private laboratory, independent laboratory, found AZT to be 1,000 times more toxic than the laboratory of the NIH? We can understand a 5% error in a laboratory, even a 10% error. But a 10,000% error or 100,000% error? That's fraud. And as I understand it, the word has gone out, and there's even documents and letters to prove it, that the CDC, the same organization that let blacks go untreated with syphilis, well documented, just to see what would happen with the disease. This same organization who had to admit that they can't give in on the AIDS thing now because nobody would ever be able to trust the government. I think the last election tells us what the people think about government. But science is acting no differently than politicians do. And now we have disease by politics.
California microbiologist Dr. Kary Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993 for his development of one of the most widely used current techniques in molecular biology today, the PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. PCR is commonly used in medical and biological research labs for the detection of virus culture in infectious persons.
The people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of the, I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH and say, here's the progress we've made. And the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, I'd look through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. And that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a scientist. It's silly to hear people saying, you don't believe that HIV causes AIDS? You don't believe that? I mean, it's just a word, but it's a very, very important distinction. I think that that's why it's become a very emotional kind of thing, because people actually, they get personally committed to what really is a body of evidence that can be analyzed, by lots of people. And at this point, there's so much of it out there, nobody can really analyze it, all of it, but nobody can write a review of it that says HIV causes AIDS because of this. If a postdoc were to write a review of their literature that showed without much doubt that HIV was the cause of AIDS, that guy would be famous. Now, there's 100,000 guys out there who had the opportunity. Just 10 years has passed. We've been waiting for this star postdoctoral fella to distinguish himself forever and get a lifelong grant from Tony Fauci, but he hasn't shown up. No one has bothered to write a definitive review. Any journal would take it. That right there proves that HIV does not cause AIDS.
30,000 Russians who tested positive for HIV were then tested with another test that's supposedly far more accurate to confirm the positivity. And 66 out of 30,000 proved to be positive. That means that the test HIV is 99.997% inaccurate. You want to take a test that's 0.003% right? And you're going to rely on that? But that's what they're doing to people out there. They're taking a test that is not only invalid, it's totally misleading. In fact, when you get results like that, then I would say you're going to be more correct that if you're read as being negative, consider yourself positive. And if you're positive, consider yourself negative. And by the way, at the request of many individuals, I did go for a test a couple of weeks ago in New York City at the biggest clinic there that does more testing than anybody else. And the doctor who ran it was bragging about the fact that he did more. When I told him about the book I wrote, he said, shh, don't say anything. My patients might hear. Okay. I tested negative. And of course, Fauci said that you need, when he was answering what I did in Cleveland a week ago, he said, well, he's going to have to stick himself 300 times to transmit the virus. Where are you people in the press? 300 times to transmit a virus? You cannot have an epidemic under those circumstances. If you can't transmit it by blood, you certainly can't transmit it sexually, unless you're into real sadistic acts during sex. I don't know how much blood you want to draw. He gives you the answer to the test in 15 minutes. So it's quite a racket. And by the way, it's very interesting because that you asked the question, because you see, I was in a quandary as to what possible purpose could this serve. If you have a test that's 99.997% inaccurate, what are you proving? You would treat somebody with a deadly drug on the basis of a test that's totally worthless. And by the way, let me point out that a research group in Australia in the past year have stated that not only is the test completely inaccurate, it's totally nonspecific. Yeah. That you could be positive if you had the measles, if you had the flu, if you had a flu shot from your doctor, or if you had any one of 100 diseases. Let's look at the scenario. This is serious business. Yeah. Somebody gets the flu or gets a flu shot this year.
Then they die. But so what you're finally suggesting is that the man that you this prominent physician in Greenwich Village, he in fact said, don't tell anybody about this because I'm making money off of these tests. Are you finally saying to people, don't get tested?
I am saying absolutely do not get tested. Would you advise anybody to take a test that's 99.997% wrong?
And you're saying that...
That's insanity. And by the way, when I said to this physician, when he asked me why I was there, and I told him I was a doctor, I said, because I'm in a heavy risk group. He said, aren't we all? And laughed about it. Because everybody knows that the medical profession sticks itself all the time, and the only individuals who are going to die of AIDS who are part of the medical profession in any way, shape, or form are those who are taking AZT or other drugs. A drug that was discovered in the 60s as a chemotherapeutic drug for cancer and was shelved because it was too toxic to treat cancer. A drug worse than cancer is being used to treat people who are immunosuppressed. But did anybody here bother to look at the insert, the paper that comes with the drug? It's a DNA terminator. It means it is a terminator, just like the movie. It terminates life. You terminate DNA, you terminate life. And they talk about side effects in the insert. When are you going to learn there is no such thing as a side effect in medicine? It's an unwanted direct effect. And you know what one of the unwanted direct effects of AZT is? Lymphoma, cancer, one of the diseases of AIDS, as they call it. Oh, another so-called side effect, which is really an unwanted direct effect, pancytopenia. You need a definition? Pancytopenia. Pan, all, cyto, cells, penia, loss of all your cells. That's AIDS. That is the definition of AIDS. So AZT, by definition, by their own drug insert, causes AIDS, and nobody survives AZT. That will eventually lead to your death. And they've cut the dosage way down because it was killing them too fast. It's like giving somebody a large dose of strychnine and they die within 5 minutes. And so the next person, you give them a few drops of it and they last 4 or 5 days, and you say, strychnine's a wonderful drug. This person lasts 5 times longer. This is the kind of thing that they present to the world. Go ahead.
You said that AIDS is not an epidemic, it's an endemic circumstance caused by a variety of factors, including malnutrition and drug use. How then can you explain the years of potential life loss in the 250,000 plus people who have died of AIDS, according to CDC definition, where drug use has been going on for centuries, and suddenly we're losing people in their 20s and 30s because I'm not sure what you're...
Okay, that's an excellent question, really. And you're using your head. That's the kind of question should have been asked of Gallo at the very beginning. And by the way, you said 20s and 30s, our healthiest people. Isn't it strange? You got a disease, the first disease in the history of mankind, that affects our healthiest? But what happened in the 60s? The drug culture began. What happened in the 70s? It heated up. At the end of the 70s, the gays came out of the closet and became an identifiable group. Now, I'll ask you, in a sense a redundant question, but I think it'll get the point across. I'm going to name 5 of 30 diseases. Tuberculosis, a new disease. Lymphoma, oh, that's a new disease too. Leukemia, oh yes, that's a very new disease too. Pneumocystis pneumonia, another new disease but lesser known. And Kaposi sarcoma, another new disease? No. These diseases and the other 25 have always been around. It's real easy, it's real simple to create an epidemic. You simply take a bunch of diseases and put them under one heading and then claim that one virus is responsible for it. Well, that's nonsense. And now they're caught up in a maelstrom. Now if the truth gets out, yes, it will deal a blow to the credibility of the NIH and the CDC and the FDA and the AMA, and my God, it is sorely needed. That blow is necessary to clean up the act. Spirit and mind are wonderful things. What you're saying is true. It's a sentence of death for most people. And immediately, their body metabolism goes into negative phases. Everything becomes destructive. This is modern medical voodoo. If a doctor tells you, you are going to die, I'm willing to bet you're going to die. I'll be the first one to put money on the line and say, the chances are you're going to beat the statistics. You will die because you've been told so. This is American voodoo. You know that you can change the T-cell count if you worry somebody? Completely established. I worry about these individuals who go in and get these T-cell counts one after another, because their whole life is focused on these T-cell counts. And when it goes down a little bit, instead of being reassured, which is the way I would interpret it, they get panicky. Now they're really doing damage. And at some point, if they're on drugs, and sometimes even if they're not on anything, but because they've been told they're going to die, like the witch doctors of Africa and elsewhere, these individuals will die because they literally worry themselves to death. It's a crime beyond belief. They're the rare ones, I admit. But the fact is, T-cell counts absolutely have no correlation with severity of disease. They can be low because you have wiped out your immune system, and they can be low because you don't need them. That's the important thing to understand. It is not a barometer for anything. And they lie, they lie, they lie, and then they lie some more.
Well,